Right now, beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, something is moving. A wall of warm water, nearly 500 feet deep and hundreds of miles wide, is sliding eastward like a slow-motion freight train. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration officially confirmed it on June 11, 2026. Scientists are already calling this the most dangerous climate event in modern recorded history. The last time something like this happened, it cost the world an estimated $5.7 trillion. And that event was weaker than what is building right now. The instruments do not lie. The ocean is doing something it has never done before, and the world is about to feel every bit of it. Before we get into what is happening right now, you need to understand what the Pacific Ocean is supposed to look like when everything is working the way it should. Most of the time, the trade winds along the equator blow steadily from east to west. Think of them like a giant fan pointed at Indonesia and northern Australia. These winds are not dramatic. They are not hurricanes, but they are relentless. And what they do is physically drag the warm surface water of the Pacific westward, hour after hour, year after year. Over time, that warm water piles up in the western Pacific. The sea surface actually sits about 20 inches higher in the west than in the east. Picture a bathtub where someone has been blowing across one end for centuries. The water tilts. Now, all that warm water being pushed away from South America has to be replaced by something. What fills that gap is cold water rising up from the deep ocean, a process called upwelling. That cold, nutrient-rich water is what feeds the anchovies off the coast of Peru and Ecuador. It supports one of the most productive fishing economies on Earth. It keeps the eastern Pacific cool. That is the system. Ocean and atmosphere, locked together, keeping each other in balance. But here's the thing about balance. It does not last forever. Every few years, the trade winds weaken. Nobody fully understands why, but when they do, that tilted bathtub stops being held in place. All that warm water that was piled up in the west starts surging back east. It travels as a deep underwater wave, and scientists call it a Kelvin wave. Right now, one of those waves is in motion across the entire Pacific basin. When that warm water reaches the coast of South America, it acts like a lid. It sits on top of the ocean and shuts down the cold water, upwelling completely. The eastern Pacific starts warming fast, and here is where it gets self-reinforcing in a way that should concern every one of us. When the eastern Pacific warms, the temperature difference between the cool east and the warm west collapses. With less contrast, the trade winds have less reason to blow, so they weaken further. With weaker winds, even more warm water stays in the east. The east warms more. The winds weaken more. The east warms more again. This feedback loop has a name. Scientists call it the Bjerknes feedback, named after Norwegian meteorologist Jacob Bjerknes, who first described it in 1969. It is the engine of every El Niño ever recorded. Once it starts running, it tends to run away with itself. That is exactly what is happening in the Pacific right now. NOAA uses something called the Oceanic Niño Index to measure the strength of an El Niño. It tracks how much warmer the sea surface is in a specific stretch of the central Pacific compared to the long-term average. A weak event sits at about 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit above average. A strong event hits around 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. To earn the label very strong, what the press calls a Super El Niño, temperatures have to reach 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above average and stay there. In the entire recorded history going back to 1950, only 3 events have ever crossed that threshold: the 1982-83 event, the 1997-98 event, and the 2015-16 event. Here is what makes 2026 different. Multiple forecasting models, including the American Climate Forecast System and the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecast model, are projecting a peak above 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. That would surpass every El Niño ever measured by modern instruments. NOAA's own forecasters put the probability of this event reaching very strong status at 63%. Those are not fringe numbers. That is the official government forecast. On top of that, there is a 9,000-mile marine heat wave that has been building in the North Pacific since late 2025, stretching from Papua New Guinea all the way to the California coast, with water temperatures running 3.6 to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. Scientists are increasingly concerned that this heat wave is feeding the El Niño, potentially amplifying it and extending its reach well into 2027. To understand what a Super El Niño actually does to the world, you have to look at what the previous ones left behind. The 1997 to 1998 event was the strongest on record until recently. Peru flooded, Indonesia and Borneo burned, peatland fires so massive they covered 6 countries in haze for months. California saw storms that washed out highways and triggered mudslides through entire neighborhoods. The official global death toll from weather events tied to that El Niño came to roughly 23,000 people, but the economic damage is what really puts it in perspective. A 2023 analysis published in the journal Science estimated total global income losses from the 1997 to 1998 event at $5.7 trillion. Most of that fell on countries in the tropics that could least afford it. The 2015 to 2016 event edged past it in intensity. It produced the worst coral bleaching event ever recorded on the Great Barrier Reef, with surveys finding mortality across roughly a third of the reef's northern and central sections. The Peruvian anchoveta fishery, the largest single-species fishery on Earth, came so close to collapse that the government canceled the second fishing season of 2016 entirely. And in the atmosphere above it all, the heat that El Niño was pumping out of the Pacific helped push 2016 to become the hottest year ever recorded at that point, breaking a record that had been set only 12 months earlier in 2015. Now consider that the event building in 2026 is projected to be stronger than both of those. Here's where this gets personal for anyone living in the United States. During a strong El Niño, the jet stream over the North Pacific shifts southward. That repositioning turns it into a conveyor belt for Pacific moisture aimed directly at the American West. For California and the Southwest, that means a high probability of frequent and intense atmospheric rivers. The kind of storms that deliver drought-busting rain, but also carry serious flood risk and mudslide danger. As that energized jet stream tracks eastward, it brings heavy rain to Texas and the Gulf Coast. But when it reaches the southeast, particularly Florida, it runs into warmer, more humid air. Historically strong El Niño winters generate a highly volatile, severe weather season for the South, elevating tornado and damaging wind risk from November all the way through March. For the northern tier, the Pacific Northwest, the Great Plains, up into Canada, expect the opposite. Drier and warmer than average winter conditions. There is also the hurricane question. When the Pacific warms significantly, it creates powerful high-altitude winds that sweep eastward across Central America and into the Atlantic Basin. This creates wind shear, essentially an atmospheric barrier that tears apart developing storms before they can organize into hurricanes. NOAA has already issued a below-normal Atlantic hurricane season forecast for 2026, predicting roughly 13 named storms compared to the historical average of 15. But here is the catch. A lower storm count does not mean a safer season. The Gulf of Mexico and Western Caribbean remain exceptionally warm. That is the perfect breeding ground for sudden, fast-developing storms forming dangerously close to the U.S. coastline. In 1992, an El Niño year with a quiet overall season, Hurricane Andrew made landfall as a Category 5 and devastated South Florida. It only takes one. Every El Niño in history has eventually ended. The same physics that drives the warming also carries the correction. Slower-moving waves called Rossby waves travel back westward across the Pacific, lifting the thermocline back up in the east, restoring the cold upwelling, and tipping the system back toward neutral, sometimes all the way into La Niña. But here is what makes 2026 genuinely unprecedented. The ocean this El Niño is arriving in is not the ocean the previous super events arrived in. The entire tropical Pacific has warmed over the past several decades. The entire tropical Atlantic has warmed. The entire tropical Indian Ocean has warmed. The background heat content of the planet is fundamentally different. Climate scientist James Hansen, the man who first warned Congress about global warming back in 1988, has said publicly that even a moderately strong El Niño in the next 12 to 18 months could push the average global temperature to roughly 3.1 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. He also said he does not expect the planet to meaningfully cool back below the critical threshold once this El Niño fades. In February 2026, NOAA officially retired the old measurement index it had used for decades and adopted a new one, the Relative Oceanic Niño Index, specifically because the old tool was no longer accurately capturing what is happening in a warming ocean. This event will be the first Super El Niño ever monitored, classified, and forecast using that new methodology from start to finish. We are, in the most literal sense, in uncharted territory. The ocean does not care about forecasts. It does not care about indexes or categories or what we call it. Somewhere beneath the surface of the Pacific right now, that warm water is still moving east. The instruments are tracking it, the models are running, and the scientists watching those numbers are not sleeping easy. What happens over the next several months will either confirm the worst-case projections, or it will not. But the ocean is already committed, and history says once it commits, it does not change its mind. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe to Space Aquarius so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a comment below and tell us where you live and what kind of weather you are already seeing. And if you know someone who would want to know about this, share this video with them right now.